So today we have the privilege of speaking with Carolyn, currently living in South Africa. I'm going to turn it to Carolyn. Is it Carolyn or Caroline?
Whichever way, but yeah, it's Caroline.
Caroline. Okay, I'm going to turn it to you. So please, over to you and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you into child protection.
So, so my name is Caroline Makumbe, and I've been in the child protection space since 2004. I started off as a volunteer, and I think what really drew me into the field was just seeing some of the injustices that were happening on children, and also just realizing how I think as adults we don't really understand children. So that is also one of the reasons why in one of my the key areas in my work is around child participation, because I really believe, even with my own children, I believe in including children, and so having meaningful inclusions and engagement with children, because we cannot expect children to turn out well if they're not involved in their own development. So I've been working around education, just ensuring equal and equitable education in the region, and also looking at adolescent sexual reproductive health and rights. I've also worked around maternal health and early childhood development, and also child protection. And recently, I've also worked around online safety. So I think in a nutshell, that's me.
Okay, and you mentioned that you currently live in South Africa. You said to me offline, but you're not originally from South Africa. So if you're feeling okay and comfortable, can you tell us where you're from and how you ended up in South Africa? And then we'll get into more so, if it's okay with you, the child protection system in South Africa.
Okay. So I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and I moved to South Africa in 2001. And I think, to be honest, I think I was forced to come to South Africa. It wasn't part of Caroline's plan. I was just forced to come to South Africa, and I actually studied my career in South Africa because I studied also in South Africa, and my first job when I came to South Africa was actually a job at a supermarket, and where I was a cleaner. And I love always mentioning this, especially because I work around youth empowerment and development. And I love mentioning this part about me because it's actually the work that actually grounded me and actually taught me um, to be humble, and to actually understand people. And it also taught me what hardworking actually meant. So it was humble beginnings for me. Um, and also a very difficult one because as an A student, this is what I was not, that I had not envisioned myself doing. But I found myself doing it. But so I started off in the travel and tourism industry, where I worked for 15 years. So from 2001 until 2016, I worked in the travel industry. And it was also quite interesting because it wasn't something that I had planned. It's something that just found me. And it also enabled me to study because I always wanted to study psychology because I wanted to work with children. I think that's always something that has always been in me. And so I studied whilst I was working in the travel and tourism industry. And I think being in the industry actually opened up doors for me because I was able to travel to so many different countries throughout the world, and I was able to meet people of different cultures and different backgrounds. And it really helped me understand people better. And it really helped me also get to know how we function as humans, and also identify some of the gaps that I was seeing around as I was traveling to different countries. And so it was also during that time, in 2004, I started the voluntary work. And I volunteered for an organization that worked with children were in who were impacted by HIV and AIDS. So I was more like a mentor to some of the children. And it was also quite an interesting time in my life, working with children. And also, it was a time when in South Africa itself, HIV was still like a taboo topic. And I volunteered, and I'm going to mention this home. I volunteered it was called the Nkosi Haven children's home. So it was a children's home that was set up for children that not necessarily had AIDS, but children who were impacted in some way by the illness. And it was founded in memory of Nkosi, who was actually an HIV advocate, and actually, sorry, my little one in the background. And so he was an advocate for HIV, and he basically raised awareness about the disease in the country. So that was, yeah, what I what actually made me also get into child protection. And also I worked around uh, with organizations that work with children that were physically and sexually abused, which was also quite a difficult one, working with those children, because sometimes it made you feel angry, especially seeing with the justice system, and how you see in most of the cases, if the cases made it to court, there were very few convictions. So you'd find that the perpetrators always walk free because there's a technicality, or they can afford an advocate, and the children can't because they come from poor backgrounds. So just seeing those injustices, and just trying to be with the children, and trying to help them in any way, for them to feel that even if the perpetrator walks, it doesn't change who they are. And it doesn't have to change the trajectory of their lives. So it was really difficult. I'm not gonna lie, it was really difficult, especially when the children lost the cases, and just having to encourage them, and having to see, like help them rebuild in some way. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for all of that, and wonderful that you've included all of your experiences, as you refer to them as humble beginnings, but I guarantee that they made you a much, much more effective and better practitioner working in the field right now. Sure, it helped you in many ways. Can you tell us about, as much as you're comfortable, as much as you want to step into it, can you tell us about the South African child protection system? How is it designed? And that's always a key element that intrigues individuals from across the world. All child protection practitioners work in systems, and it's always intriguing to hear about the different systems. If we can start there, can you tell us, maybe give us a macro understanding of the system, and more on the ground, of how staff step into it day to day and what they experience and how they carry their jobs.
Okay. So I think we probably have one of the best um, children's acts in the world. um, but I think there is a little bit of a disconnect when it comes to implementation, and for various reasons. And I think some of the reasons obviously would be around funding and also having funders who come in and then there isn't that sustainability in terms of some of the projects that you see. Um, but having said that, I think it's also important to note that there is quite a lot that is happening around the country in terms of child protection. Um, so South Africa is unfortunately is one of the countries with the highest rates of gender-based violence, on women, including children. And what's really sad about it is that there's very few reporting that actually takes place, and also because children either don't know or how to report the cases, or in most cases, and this is the sad part about it, is that in most cases the perpetrator is someone that the children themselves know. So it's either an uncle, a brother, the mom's boyfriend, and the like. And so through the one of the organizations that I worked with, we were working with children, who were sexually abused. And one of the things that I actually picked up during that time was that the children were never believed, especially by those close to them. So it would become very difficult for them to actually share their experiences and for them to report the cases of the abuse. And also culturally, we don't publicly talk about sex, you know. So for a child to then come and say, "Oh, Uncle so and so," or uh, the neighbor, Mr. So and so raped me, it then becomes very difficult for the children to then release that. So some of the initiatives that I've worked around have been to actually empower the children to be able to share their stories, even if nobody believes them. Because there's also something that happens psychologically when you begin speaking about your experiences. There's some form of healing that actually comes from that. So we always encourage the children to share their experiences, no matter how difficult it is. And so you find that also with most of the children that I've worked with, they either shared the incidences with their teachers or maybe a close relative, someone that they felt would believe them or understand them. But in most cases, um, they never shared with their mothers, which is actually quite interesting because you'd think that they would share with their mothers, but the mother in most cases was always the last to know. And for different reasons. And I think one of the things that I always try and encourage parents to do is to have open and honest communication with their children. Because if my child cannot come, does not feel confident enough to come or comfortable enough to come and actually tell me that something has happened to them or somebody has touched them inappropriately and things like that, um, then it shows you that there's obviously a communication gap between the children and the parents. And like I mentioned, also historically looking at our different cultures on how you cannot speak about sex to your parents. Even at my old age, I mean, I'm in my 40s, I cannot speak to my parents right now about sex. It's something that is just it's just taboo. So it becomes really difficult then for children to then share their experiences. And there's also the issue of self-blame, that you find that the children then blame themselves because maybe I wasn't dressed appropriately. Maybe I shouldn't have gone to this person's house. Maybe I shouldn't have done this. Maybe. So they tend to blame themselves, and also the perpetrators threaten them. So being children, because they're not cognitively developed like us adults, it becomes really, if someone says, I will kill your parents if you tell them, they will really believe that this person is capable of doing this heinous crime. So it becomes really difficult for the children to report. Um, but what's also good about the South African system, even though there's a lot of loopholes, I think in any country, there's no perfect system. But one of the things that is actually good about the South African system is that they have, within the South African police system, they have the child protection units, which is actually dedicated to children. But the problem also comes with not having enough resources. So you find that even though they've got this particular unit that is dedicated to children and such issues, like any issues really that deal with children, there's limitations around resources. So you find that investigators have got piles of cases. So when it comes to going to court, it then becomes very difficult because you are dealing with investigators who are inundated with their work. You're dealing with prosecutors who also have so much work. And then you find that sometimes the perpetrator is someone who is able to afford an advocate, for example. So they've got a higher chance of walking free because they've got an advocate, and also it's very difficult in most cases to actually provide evidence for some of these cases. So you might find that maybe the incident happens today, and remember the children are still growing up. So maybe the incident happens today, and then the child only reports in 5, 10 years time. A lot has happened in between. So it's very difficult at times to actually get evidence, or maybe they're raped and then they get home and they wash themselves. So they've gotten rid of the evidence. Or you might find also that DNA is tampered with, or it takes time also to get DNA results and things like that. So I think if there's one thing that I find like where there's really a huge gap, when it comes to child protection in the country, it's around the justice system, where we find that there's not the children don't have you know their cases take too long. Firstly, they take too long, and which is quite frustrating for the children, because these are children who are at school. So sometimes they have to come out of school to attend court cases, and also they have to relive these experiences that they're trying to shut down, or experiences that they've now found a way to deal with. So it's almost like reliving that trauma. So every time they're going to court, they're reliving that trauma. So these are things that I feel like, you know, the justice system doesn't really get to understand. And also, I mean, so in South Africa, children normally there's some courts like that have what is called children's room. It's like a children's it's a it's a it's a children's room where the child can actually go into that particular room and testify in that room, so they don't have to see the perpetrator. But it's also open to certain age groups because if they feel the child is old enough to be in the courtroom, then they put the child in the courtroom. Or sometimes the child thinks they are good enough to be in the courtroom, but then that they really relive the trauma when they see the perpetrator. So it gets then a very complicated and very difficult. But I think there is a lot that still needs to be done, around protecting children and ensuring that number one, they know their rights, because that's also one of the issues that when the children don't know their rights, when the parents don't know the children have got their rights, then it becomes really difficult for the children to get any justice or to even know that their rights have been violated, especially in cases where the perpetrators make them believe that they are the ones who are at fault and not the perpetrator themselves. So it's really I think just coming to your question in terms of the system itself, there are systems in place. Like I mentioned, the police is there. They've got the child protection unit. Some schools have got counselors, and there are organizations that are working around, such as Childline, Child Helpline. There's also the Teddy Bear Foundation. They're all working, around helping children, whether it's offering psychosocial support or whatever help that the children need. But there's still a lot that needs to be done because the need is so great. And you find that there's not enough resources to be able to help those children. And, one of the things that we found out through research is that abused children grow up to be abusers themselves. So that's also one of the key issues that we need to deal with to ensure that the children themselves don't grow up to be the very people that they are running away from, that they're trying so hard not to be.
Oh, okay. So if it's okay, I'd like to get some clarification, and thank you for giving us
Okay.
an excellent overview of the system. Um, so as I understand it, there is an overarching governmental body in South Africa that put in place laws and statutes concerning child protection. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So there is a law.
Yeah.
And is that a governmental body that then funds local child protection units? Is that where funding comes from?
So there are different ways where funding comes from. So you find that you've got your NGOs that get funding from. They do some do get funding from the government. Some, but it's limited funding. It's
Okay.
very limited funding. So you find that most of the funding that these organizations who are working with children um, get is actually through funders. So it's through your development partners that actually are funding the NGOs.
So
But there is funding that does come from the government, but it's just that it's not enough to tackle all the issues that the children are faced with.
okay. So the child protection unit, is it a government entity or a private entity that's funded by government and NGOs?
Okay. So the Child Protection Unit is a unit that is within the SAPS. So
S
that's the so
SAPF.
I'm so used sorry, I'm so used to abbreviations.
Yeah, yeah.
South Africa Police. That's the
Cool.
South Africa Police.
Okay.
Yeah.
South African Police Force. Okay.
Yeah.
And are
Yeah.
these are the Child
So
Protection
that's a
Unit,
unit. Yeah.
are they social workers? Sorry to interrupt, Caroline. Are they social workers or police officers?
No, no, this is law enforcement. This is law enforcement.
Okay.
Yes, this is law enforcement. So they do work with social workers, but those are usually like outsourced from organizations that they're partnering with. But in terms of the unit itself, it's law enforcement. Yeah.
I see. So it's quite different than it is in the West, where here the Child Protection Service is operated by social workers predominantly, who take who see that the statutes of child protection are right are adhered to. So um the what is by definition in South Africa child abuse? What falls under the umbrella of child abuse in South Africa?
I think it varies because we've got physical abuse where you have children who are beaten up, if we should put it that way. You've got a sexual abuse where it's children that are sexually abused, and then obviously you also have like your emotional abuse where it's your children that are being emotionally abused in one way or the other, whether it's through bullying. So it does. I think abuse does take different forms.
Okay.
Depending, yeah, it does take different forms. So it really depends what type of abuse it is. Um, but generally bordering around your physical and your sexual abuse and then your emotional abuse also.
So is it fair to say then that the Child Protection Unit within the SAPF will receive a report of a form of child abuse and they open a case and they investigate? Correct? Is that accurate?
So yeah, so usually what happens is the first step would be to go to the police station and report the abuse. So whether it's a physical abuse or a sexual abuse, whatever abuse it is. So and then they assign a police office, like an investigator
Okay.
from the unit to then investigate and then work with the children on the case.
And what is the purpose of what's the resolution, the intent, like what is the intended resolution for that? Is it criminal charges or is it also welfare and well-being of the child?
I think for if you're going to get a case, if you want to report the case, then that is obviously the route to take, because you don't want the perpetrator to repeat what they've done, you know.
Okay.
So that would be generally why you would go and report the case. But I think in terms of psychosocial support, like I mentioned, there are organizations that work with the police that do offer that kind of support, that
Mm,
are trained, in evaluating, obviously, the mental health of the children, and helping the child in whatever way that they actually need help, when it comes to the case. So you might find that sometimes they need to do an assessment, like an age assessment,
mm,
where you might find that maybe the child is um, 10 years old but behaving like a 5-year-old. Or you might find that in some cases, the children are quite young because the children are like maybe 3 years and they don't really know how to express themselves. So they are trained to then know how to work with children because most of these are like your social workers, your child psychologists who work with children. So they know how to work with children. They know how to ensure they express themselves, obviously in a child-friendly manner. Because one of the reasons also why I suppose the police has to have this particular child protection unit and also working with external providers is because we need to ensure that the child isn't re-traumatized
Mm-hmm.
by the event. So if you think about it as an adult, if you were to go to to the police station and you report a case, um, it's quite traumatic. I mean, being in the police station itself is quite traumatic. You know, being in court, it's quite traumatic. So that's why there are these systems in place to ensure that there's minimal damage that is actually being done on the children, to ensure that the children are comfortable, to ensure that they're safe, to ensure that there's no they're not reliving the trauma again.
Okay. And so this um child protection unit then, if the investigation leads to a conclusion that the child is not safe with her parents, what are their what are the possibilities that exist within the system? Where would she go in the South African system?
Okay. So they would either maybe take them to a family member that is willing to take the child. And if there's no family member, there's also organizations that that do work with this children where they would take in the children and they will provide obviously support and safety for the children. So there are systems in place to ensure that the children do have places to actually go to when they're not safe, especially in cases where it's someone really close to them that is the perpetrator. So you find that they would take the children to places of safety.
Got it. So you're talking about their possibility of kinship. Foster, is there are you referring also to foster homes? These would be foster parents?
No, no, not
No,
not
no
not
foster
foster
parents.
parents. No, no, not
Orphanages?
not. So more like your orphanages and more yeah. So more like your orphanages, and you also have organizations that are actually working with children,
Mm,
where they actually get the children and they provide a safe space for the children.
okay.
It could be temporarily. So they're they're like they're more like your shelters, but not in the
A,
Western way.
a
So it's more
group
like
home?
your orphanages. Pardon?
Like a group home? We call them group homes.
Um, mm-mm, not not
No?
not not not
Okay.
not a group home in that sense. So it's more like an orphanage. If we
More like an orphanage.
it's more like an orphanage. Yeah, I think for easier understanding, I would say it's more like an orphanage. Yeah.
Okay. And Caroline, so here in the West, there is a focus and on healing and helping children and families, even the perpetrators, come to a conclusion of healing together and reconciling children with their parents and doing that in a safe way. Who will take on that work in South Africa?
So I think, as I mentioned, there are organizations. One of them is the one that I used to volunteer with, who do support both children and families.
Mm.
When any form of abuse has taken place. They support them in terms of even sometimes also trying to find a place of safety, because sometimes you might find, for example, like if the perpetrator is the mom's husband or boyfriend, they
Hmm.
might the the child and the mom might not feel safe to be there with the perpetrator, so they might find them a place of safety. So there are organizations that work around that, and they also work around, just helping the families to actually work together
Okay.
and to find healing for the sake of the child. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. So thank you for so that gives I think it gives well it gives me and probably those who are watching who are from the West a better understanding of your system and how it operates. Um Now you talked about your passion and what you're doing right now, and I think it's important that you talk about it. Um, before we get there, what would you identify? You've mentioned a few. So I have two questions. Are the biggest challenges in child protection, you'd say, in South Africa right now? What are the ones that the make the job harder for the you talked about the courts, but what else would you say makes it harder? And then what are some misconceptions that the public in South Africa thinks or believes about child protection?
I think in terms of the challenges, I think the main challenge will always be around reporting, that there's not enough reporting that's actually being done, because the children are scared or they feel ashamed, because they blame themselves. So I think that's one of the main challenges actually. And then in terms of the misconception, I think the misconception is that you're not going to be believed. I think that's the misconception, that nobody's going to believe me. I think like I mentioned, you're dealing with children who have not fully developed cognitively. Um, and so it becomes really challenging for them to have to deal. I mean, life is already hard enough, and they're already faced with so many different issues, socioeconomic issues, so you find that this is a difficult situation on top of the issues that they're already dealing with and trying to navigate life through. So it's very difficult for the children to actually deal with with abuse, and having to find that person that they trust, someone that they can communicate to, someone who's going to believe them. So it becomes really, really difficult. So I think the misconception is around there, that nobody's going to believe me, and also that there are no systems in place to protect me. But the systems are there. It's just that they are not aware of the systems. So some of the projects that I've worked around has been to try and familiarize children with some of the systems, to try and break it down, obviously, like in a child-friendly manner, to say, okay, when an incident happens, what are the steps, like the practical steps that you can take to actually ensure you get justice, whatever that that justice is, in terms of um, getting that perpetrator maybe reported and maybe arrested. So those are some of the initiatives that I've worked around, where we've actually helped empower children, especially during the COVID, where there was a lot of abuse that was taking place, because usually the schools are the safe haven for the children. But now, because of COVID, they were stuck in homes with their perpetrators. So we did quite a lot of trainings around trying to empower children to actually report some of these violations when they did take place.
Okay. Um, I'm also curious, and this came up in conversations with your colleagues from Kenya and Nigeria around the various and the different, and maybe some of us here in the West don't understand the how culturally different, well, the cultural diversity within, for example, in Nigeria or Kenya. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that in South Africa, and how do you work with that when there's so much cultural diversity between villages and clans and so on.
I think it's very difficult to navigate, to be honest, because when you look at the population in South Africa, I mean, it's made up of so the country has got 12 official languages. I think that's oh, is it, sorry, not 12, 10 official languages. And so I think that's also what one of the issues where you find that there's so many different cultures with so many different belief systems, just being South African only. And then that compounded by the fact that there's also a lot of foreigners in the country. So you find that the country has got a lot of people that are coming from neighboring countries like Lesotho, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and also from other countries from up north in Africa. So they quite a diverse uh, community in the country. So everybody sees things differently because I think when you have people of such diversity, you find that um, everybody has got different worldviews. How they see, how they view things, how they analyze situations. So, as I mentioned, that with most of the African cultures, you find that we don't talk about sex and also issues that happen in the home cannot be published or publicized, because um, we have to keep it in the home, to protect the family. So you find that usually takes place at the expense of the child because the families don't want the issues to be made public. So you find that they just bury things, under the carpet because we don't want to talk about this because it will bring shame to the family. So that those are some of the issues that we see that people don't want to talk about it. And also you find that like I say that we process things differently. So you find that there's also quite a number of undocumented immigrants in the country, from the neighboring countries and from the rest of Africa, from Pakistan, those places. And you find that in such cases, they don't report the incidences because they are undocumented. Because then, if you go to the police station, they will need to see your identity document because they need to see you're who you saying you are. So because of that, you find that they will not report the cases. And also, there's also the South Africa is one of the countries with the highest inequalities in the world. I think there was a study that was done by WHO a couple of years ago that actually uh, found those findings that South Africa is actually one of the countries with the highest inequalities in the world. So, given that, you find that in in cases where um, it's the perpetrator is someone from a rich family and the victim is someone from a poor family, it becomes really difficult for the victim to actually get justice because, as I mentioned earlier, uh, someone who's wealthy is able to pay for an advocate, who can fight the case and find loopholes because there's always some loophole in the system that they can manipulate. So it becomes really, really difficult then for the person from a poor background to actually get justice. And sometimes you find that because the court system is inundated with so many cases, it takes so much time, for the cases to actually, go to court or for justice to actually be served. So you find that, for example, like in cases where um, people are not, the victims are not originally from that particular city or that particular country. So you might find that, so with the way that, for example, like in Johannesburg, there's a lot of people that are coming from neighboring countries, but there's also a lot of people that are coming from other cities within South Africa. So you might find that, someone is from um, Port Elizabeth, that's where they come from, and they move with the family to Johannesburg, and then they go back to Port Elizabeth. So it then becomes difficult to then follow up with the cases, which take years in most of the in so many instances because of limited resources. So it's really, in terms of just the dynamics itself. It's not just the culture itself or the differences in cultures, but there are other variables in place that that actually impact some of these cases. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. Um, so it brings me to you talked about your passion and what you're working on now, and can you tell us about that and how it connects to child protection and what you're doing? And yeah.
Uh, okay. So one of the things that I'm doing at the moment, okay, maybe just start off with my passion that most of the work that I do is actually motivated by my two Gen Alphas. So at the moment, I'm working around online safety, advocating obviously for frameworks that ensure protection of children online. And also, so one of the projects that I'm working at the moment is we're working on actually empowering software engineers and developers in the global south uh, to to develop child-centric products, including AI. Because one of the issues that we are seeing, especially being in this space, is that when you look at social media, you look at technology itself, it's not designed with children in mind, and it's also not designed for the specific needs of African children. So this is one of the things that we also trying to address to see, to address the inequalities that are actually there, within technology. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to then empower the people who are actually developing these platforms, these products, to be able to develop, products that speak to the identity, the culture, and the needs of the unique needs of African children, which we find that the global north is maybe not aware of or not interested in because we're finding that a lot of a lot of these platforms, a lot of this technology, a lot of these tech industries are actually creating products, and they they are pushing profit over safety. So I think it's up to us as Africans ourselves to say, how do we ensure that our children are protected? How do I ensure that my children are protected from these systems and these platforms that we ourselves have not created. So that's what we currently working on, and it's not easy. It's not easy, because there isn't really, if you look at most of the countries in Africa, when you're looking at in terms of the frameworks that are in place, there aren't really enough frameworks in place to actually protect children online. And you find that a lot of governments, including the South African governments, with some of the policies that they are putting in place to protect children, whether it's policies around AI, those policies are built on frameworks and guidelines from the North. So a lot is being borrowed from the EU, because the EU, is doing quite a lot in terms of, developing frameworks and guidelines to ensure accountability for some of this tech for the tech industry. So you find that the governments are actually borrowing some of these frameworks, and it becomes very difficult to then contextualize it to the specific needs of African children, which is very different from the children from Europe, for example. So those are some of the challenges that we also faced with at the moment.
Okay. Lots of wisdom, Caroline. And at this point, is there anything else you'd like to share, or any questions that I didn't ask that I should have asked you, or anything else that you haven't said that you want to say?
Um, I think maybe one thing that we didn't talk about was the fulfillment that you actually get in the work that you do, working with children, because children are a vulnerable population, and just knowing that you are contributing, even when it's in a small way, um, it's really something that you cannot exchange with anything. It's just an experience that is really fulfilling. And I think for me personally, for all these years to have been part of working with children and making a difference in their lives, it's and seeing as some of the, because I know I didn't speak about this, some of the work that I do with young people on youth development and empowerment, but seeing them excel in life, and it's really been a joy just watching it, just watching them realize their full potential, which they wouldn't have had I not contributed even in a small way. So for me, it's always a kind word goes a long way. um, you know, a lot of the children I work with call me auntie. So in the African culture, an auntie, uh, um, in my mother tongue, is someone that you look up to, someone who gives you advice, and someone who is there for you when you need direction in life, when you need guidance or anything. So for me, it's always a joy working with children, and also um, you know seeing the change, that the meaningful change that I'm seeing happening in their lives. And yeah, we don't always get it right, but I think just the little that we're doing, in our different spaces, I think it really goes a long way. And also maybe also I think another thing just to also add on to is how we're also working around with African children to help them be proud of their heritage. Because I think if there's one thing that colonialism has done is it's really taken away our identity as Africans. And so as a result, there's such a negative narrative around Africa and Africans, and which is not always true. I'm not saying everything is perfect, but I think being an African myself and looking at where how I've built myself, for example, like I told you, I don't know if this was offline or here, where I said I started off like very humble beginnings. And so when people see you now, it's difficult for them to actually picture that what you've gone through. So I think as Africans, we've got our unique experiences that we've gone through. But I think one thing that um, remains true to us being Africans is what we call Ubuntu, like being able to live in someone else's shoes. And I think one other thing that I actually forgot was one thing about Africa that is probably unique to Africa is that we believe it takes a village to raise a child. So because of that, and true, the dynamics are changing and stuff because a lot of people are moving more into the cities, and it's the big walls, the people are isolated and stuff. But growing up, I can tell you that I've turned out the way that I've turned out because there were people who raised me who were not even my parents, because they took it upon themselves to say, you are not just the neighbor's child, you are my child. So I think that's where we actually differ, the Africans from the global north, is that we see each other as we're responsible for each other. And I think that's really one thing that I also really want to teach my children, because even when I'm with friends' children, and even when they're with my children, we know that if they do something wrong, we're going to reprimand them, because what we're doing is we're molding them, and we're doing it together, because it's not easy doing it on your own. As a parent, you don't always get it right, but yeah, when you've got that support system, it goes a long way.
I agree with everything you've said. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for saying what you did, and
Yeah.
especially what a great place to end. Thank you so
Mm.
much for your time. I appreciate you agreeing to do
It's
this
been a
and
pleasure.
and speaking with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.